Hello, friends. I'm so happy you joined us for this episode of the Enneagram and Marriage Pod. I am so grateful you pressed play today. We are talking about something so important. This is a conversation with Sam Jolman. You know, he's a therapist and a writer, author of the book, The Sex Talk You Never Got, Reclaiming the Heart of Masculine Sexuality. This is a book John Eldredge of Wild at Heart says this is the best book on sexuality you can read. So I hope you will run to get this. It's a really good Audible read, which is where I read it as well. And when I first talked to Sam and did this interview, I had actually thought the book was still due to be out, or I would have interviewed him or tried to at least before because it came out just a few months ago. So I'm really excited to put forth this episode as soon as possible to get it into your hands because it's an absolutely wonderful guide for all of us who did not get the sex talk we needed and who still have, as Sam said, even as a therapist, it took him 20 years into his marriage to learn things. Some of the things he's teaching, I'm still learning. He is just absolutely shared by so many that we have loved here on the podcast: Jay Stringer, Dan Allender, Sheila Ray Gregoire, and some guests we have coming up: Laura Ferguson Wilbur and Chuck DeGroat. So this is an author you want to pay attention to, not just for the kudos, but his guide here. It's kind, wise, poetic, and I think that the register here is for us to realize that whenever we're doing important growth-based work, we do need that frame of kindness because there's a lot of judgment that goes on. And actually, as we'll talk today and through the book, if you read it, just so much shaming and damnation for those who are just hurting. And this extends out towards each other and trying to be misogynistic sometimes and not even doing it intentionally, but just trying to self preserve while we save face and deal with our own shame. And so, in the book and in our conversation, we're hoping to give you a through line to understand some of your own sexual issues and little steps for courage so you can bring forth a much healthier sexuality together. And in the book, you get even conversations on a deeper dive level about some of the things you may wonder about. Am I wrong or bad for doing this? What do I do with these thoughts? What do I do when I feel like I am dealing with sexuality and it's a frequent issue and my spouse won't want to have sex with me? And so many more deep, important issues that you might need to process through are in that book. But here, we're also bringing up some very important topics from the book and outside of the book because you know my curious mind is right there with you, wanting to ask all the questions and even share a few stories. So I'm grateful you're tuning in for this convo. Get your fall coffee or whatever beverage. Make sure you don't rush through any of this one. This is just a good one to take your time with. You might already have seen on the notes, but what's fun about this episode is that we have a new combo we've not interviewed on the pod before, and that is a 4-4 combo. Sam and his wife have the most beautiful story about that. And I'm so grateful we get to hear that here. There's more of it in the book too. And I love a guest who can be vulnerable and say, I'm doing my work with you. I was, dealing with myself as a raging misogynist, not meaning to be, but just in that space before I really realized what was going on underneath. And coming through that with us to say, wow, let's go back to awe and beauty and wonder together as married couples. Let's find our way back to joy, intimacy, creativity, and love. This is an episode you need. So thank you for joining. We're going to be celebrating the Enneagram and Marriage book Wednesday and onward a little bit as we hit our 1 year book anniversary. So thanks for sticking around for just this season too. Have loved doing this season with you. Love promoting other authors. And next season, we're going to get into some deep dives with couples too. So I'm very thrilled for that. And let's go ahead and talk to Sam right here. Sam, thank you so much for joining us for the Enneagram and Marriage podcast today. We're so excited to have you.
Krista, thank you for having me. I've been excited for our conversation.
Oh my goodness. Well, me too. I'm so grateful to get to talk with you. You're busy, you're doing beautiful things in the world. And just so our audience can catch up with you before your book comes out, your amazing book, tell us a little bit about yourself. We know that you have your narrative training from the Allender Center. And I was curious also about Enneagram type and marriage.
Yes, yes. So as I say in this order, I'm a lover, a father, an author, and a therapist. And I'm a lover. I'm love God and love my wife of 21 years. And I also have three boys we have a teenager as of a few weeks ago, and then I'm a therapist and a writer, and I just came out with my first book. It came out in June.
Mm,
The Sex Talk You Never Got,
mm,
Reclaiming the Heart of Masculine Sexuality. So those four things tend to consume my time. We also just got a puppy. Um, so that was the reward to my sons for my book launching is
oh,
we're gonna
wow.
get a dog. So um Enneagram type. So I've wrestled to find
Mm,
mine over many years, and I've come across Beatrice Chestnut, her work, the
mm,
Enneagram. I'm
yeah.
looking at the complete Enneagram, and
Yeah.
I had to look up again. She calls it a self-preservation four. I'm a
Mm.
self-preservation four. I
Mm.
think some of the dilemma is my wife is a four as
Oh my
well,
gosh.
a social
Fascinating.
four. So I
Wow. You're the first
maybe
4-4 couple we've had on, but you know it
okay.
from Bee's work that the instincts are absolutely important to the distinctions. Of course, you have the
Yes.
male female overlay as well, but I love
Right.
that you're like, we're not the same because of our instincts.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that led us to like um finding her work helped us to delineate like, oh,
Mm,
that's why we have some differences between us because we don't resonate across all things. So um
mhm.
but that led to our origin story, how we came together. Um she was the we met in college. She was the cute girl on campus I never had the courage to ask out. Took
Oh,
me a
that's
number of years to finally get up the courage, and that was some of my own even growth as a man. um and you can imagine two fours talking and dating.
yeah.
I mean, it was a deep dive into the realms of suffering and life and longing. And I
Yeah.
mean, we literally, for 6 months of dating, did not finish a meal at a restaurant because we talked
Oh,
so extensively.
gosh.
And so,
Wow.
for better or worse, we actually took a picture of us when we finally finished a meal together, where we actually ate. And so it's it's been beautiful to feel that resonance with each other of at times needing though to find a handhold on the side of the pool of engaging our lament
Yeah.
and making sure that's not the premise of our marriage only. So
Yeah, coming together with joy has been probably a
yeah.
theme you have really fought for together.
Yes. Yes, that's true.
Wow, I'm so glad. And how funny that I know our fours listening are appreciating because one of the most important things we talk a ton about instincts here. It's my favorite area actually of
Mm,
Enneagram. But second of all, we talk a lot here about how fours take life very paced and slow and how we need to learn to honor that.
yeah.
And of course, we know fours have their work to pick up and move, etc. The self-pres four being the most ambitious in that way. But
Hmm.
I guess I just really wanted to comment that noticing you saying, "We know we take forever to eat." Like, I just know so many fours are resonating. In our four, we have our almost 19-year-old four. She is self-pres, and it takes
Okay.
forever for her to finish a meal. So it's just like very helpful for us all to hear, like, give you guys your time, right?
Yes, that's right. Yes, and the pace of life burns us out. And
Yeah.
I present sometimes like a one, and so I'm able to kind of push
Mhm.
forward
Yes.
and be the
Mhm.
tenacity, I think is what Beatrice
Mhm.
calls it. But
Mhm.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
But you made your final kind of like pièce de résistance when you come from 4 to 1 to 2, because that is your route is always gonna be that you could approach 1 and be very diligent and hardworking and responsible and dutiful, but the softness of I think where your book has landed you has been the
Mm.
helper, the
Yeah.
giver. Like, I am gonna
Uh-huh.
give, but not just from a rigidity, but from a rested place, from a
Mhm.
hopeful place, from a deep place. So I just feel like your work, now that I know you're a 4, I can see the whole trajectory. I love it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for even your feedback. It's a gift to me.
Oh, I'm so glad. Yeah, you're doing beautiful work. And I know it's still hard, right? Somebody said to me yesterday, a client, about, we're still going to have losses and hardships. And yeah, we are, even if we're doing our
Mhm,
work. So,
mhm. That's
but
right.
we just really appreciate you. And today we're talking about sex and your awesome book. And we are also just noticing that, as I've heard you on so many interviews, you talk about how married sex is fraught with issues and shame.
Mhm,
And we've covered so much about female hormone cycles on
mm,
this pod. I'm wondering if you can help us to understand men better. Particularly, you talk about the wounded lover as we understand male
mhm,
sexuality.
mm. Yeah, uh, male sexuality hormonally obviously runs on testosterone, and there's been a less study because it doesn't cycle near as much as hormones do for women.
Mhm,
But there is, some cycling that they're starting to be able to track, but largely that's not what drives male sexuality primarily. It turns it on, so to speak. It's
mhm,
there because of testosterone.
mhm,
And sometimes they see testosterone cycles with women's
mm,
ovulation cycles that it can rise and fall, that there can actually be even a kind of male menopause. They're
mm,
being curious about in European countries, but nevertheless, primarily, I would say, you know, male sexuality, the wounded lover, there's this thing in male culture that says, men just want sex
mhm,
and that's all they need, right? The emotional stuff, the romance is for women, and
mhm,
men just want sex. And uh, gosh, that is not true
mm,
of the
mhm,
men I sit with, and
mhm,
it's certainly on a bell curve. Are men more the initiators or
mhm,
have a higher sex drive than women? Yes, right. In a bell curve, and again, that means that there's ways in which that doesn't present that way, that some relationships actually have women with a higher
mhm,
desire.
mhm,
Um, so, but I have men come to my office on the regular and say, I know I'm supposed to just want sex, but I actually like the emotional stuff. Or
mhm,
even to say things like, I feel like the woman in the relationship because I want connection. Um, and even Dr. Sue Johnson, who writes on adult attachment, would say, you know, um, when she talks about her male clients that have a higher sex drive or desire for sex, she would say, well, I would too if it was the only place I was allowed to get touch outside of the football field.
mm,
Meaning that, right, there's this sense in masculine culture of you're not allowed to want the romance or the
mm,
emotional stuff or
yeah.
um, connection. And every man I've sat with wants that stuff too, even if he doesn't necessarily know how to ask for it or talk
Mhm,
from it.
mhm,
Um, but men's hearts deeply track with relationship and want to be wanted and desired and pursued and related to. And sometimes sex is the place that they bring all those needs for better or worse. Um, and yes, men, within that, the wounded lover, um,
mhm,
every man has his stories of where his heart's been wounded in that journey, through his sexual development or even into dating and relationships, even
mhm,
adulthood. I mean, men bear those wounds in profound ways. As a therapist, I get that front row seat on witnessing just how deeply men can be wounded by the dance of love,
mhm,
and the dance
mhm.
of sex.
Mm, mm. Yes, so well said. And just reminding everybody that, because they're seeing their lives in sort of a prism, you're like, I know you see yourself reflected back in family, but you have this myriad of couples and clients, as do I. And men are really also feeling, like you said, guilty for admitting that they have needs emotionally as well.
Yeah.
And why do you think? I know that, as we said, testosterone may play some role in cultural shaping and outgrouping and grouping. We know things like that play a role, but right now in culture, what would you say the role purity culture has been in that? I know a lot of purity culture has been shared unintentionally, that a lot of pastors and fathers and mothers meant well. But do you feel like that's been part of the ways that guys have seen themselves as like sex crazed a little bit?
Yeah, this idea that I think some of the setup of, again, like, these are urges you're
Right.
really gonna struggle to control,
Yeah.
and it can really cast this vision of you're an animal
Mhm.
that, gosh, you're just gonna struggle with these urges. Even some of the obligation sex message within purity culture of,
Yeah.
you've got to make sure your husband gets his sex right so he doesn't go in lust, and every man's
Mhm.
battle, and this idea that, again, y- sex will be, essentially out of control in you, sexual desire. I think
Mhm.
it sets up again this idea that men just want sex,
Mhm.
um and that you're an animal. I mean, talk about a diminishment of men,
Mm. Mhm.
and no one, really setting the tone for, again, men want more than that.
Mhm.
um and there was a research study that Sheila Gregoire did.
Mhm.
She asked the question, is lust every man's battle? Is it something that men are constantly struggling with? And in her research, 80% of men, around 80%, said yes. They
Mhm.
they self-disclosed, like, yes, I
Yeah.
struggle on a daily basis with lust.
Yeah.
But when she drilled down to kind of explore, well, what do you mean? What are the behaviors you're describing as lust? She
Mhm.
found there was only about 33% that had any discernible
Mm.
lust behaviors by the research questions, meaning there's this huge amount of men that think they're lusting, right? When they're not. And her conclusion was she sensed, largely these men are just being moved by beauty
Right.
in another woman, and moving on with their day, that it's not turning to lust. This isn't something that's just sort of animal, um,
Mm.
in a man. So I think, the setup, like, you're just gonna struggle with this, you're more of an animal. And then as well, this the lack of much else being talked about,
Mhm.
of romance and
Mhm.
relationship and how to please a woman, and um, uh, connection, and how to pursue someone's heart, right? Like, all the other sides of the sex talk, I would say. This idea more that it's just gonna run itself, right? That, again, many men just got a basic anatomy lesson, and then
Mhm.
a
Yeah.
quick purity lecture, and
Right.
that was kind of the summary of their sex talk.
Right.
And you think about the implication there is it's just going to run itself, and don't screw it up.
Mm.
And
Mhm. Lust
with
management.
yeah, well said. Um, and I think that's left men with so much shame about, like, well, what if I have other questions, or um, you know, how do you kiss a girl, or how, some of the
Yeah.
questions my sons have even asked at
Mhm.
their age, like,
Yeah.
Dad, how how do you ask a girl out?
Mhm.
Like,
Mm.
how do you actually do that?
Yeah.
Right? Or how do you know when you want to marry somebody? How do you actually, like,
Yeah.
tell them that?
Mhm.
And,
Mm.
these really innocent, those are young lover questions
Yeah.
that are in every young man. And we don't make a lot of room for that.
Oh, that's so helpful. And that's something that I love about your work, that you help men to come back to innocence and awe, and to realize that this is not a terrible part of them, that sexual desire is part of their God-given heritage. And I love that you quoted Sheila. We've had her on here a couple times,
Mhm.
and we just find her work so engaging in that way, to show us the deeper dive on what's under the surface. Along with, as you said, there's going to be pieces where there's a lot of thirst for desire at times and in stages of life. But I was even recalling this week, researching myself, that from the ages of like 12 to 15, guys' testosterone went from like 2 to 14 or something. So I had to have a conversation with one of
Mhm.
my friends to be like, can your son be gentle? My son isn't there yet. So
Yeah.
he can't be throttled quite yet. He doesn't have the musculature for that. So I think that it's, something we're all learning together, but I just really
Yeah.
appreciate you taking this on, because it's such a big topic. I guess I really want to follow that up with, um, knowing what you said about just how most of us, if not all of us, even from the garden, have had just a strange sexual, whole response cycle where we were
Mhm.
ashamed. And I've seen the research from Jay Stringer and others on shame and how much it affects. Tell us about what, because most of us have had sexual abuse, what that does. And when I say sexual abuse, I mean just showing pornography to
Mm-hmm.
kids, etc. What
Mm-hmm.
does that do to our sexual heritage? Also, if we want to make some changes and shifts to be healthier.
Mm. Yeah, great question. Uh, I'm convinced that um, evil hates our sexuality, and
Hmm.
evil desires to come very early in our stories to join sexuality to shame. You think
Hmm.
about what was the magic weapon that evil used in the Garden of Eden. Um, to assault Adam and Eve and to get them to shut down. It was shame, right?
Hmm.
They were naked and unashamed at the end of Genesis
Hmm.
2.
Wow.
And there's this beautiful innocence to how they meet. And, Adam pours forth poetry and, right? There's the sense of, wow, they are, innocent and alive to their sexuality and to each other, their humanness. Um, and then evil comes to bring shame to that. So I would say, the idea that evil, I like how you expanded the definition. Every single one of us has experienced some assault from evil, some way that evil came to join shame to our
Hmm.
arousal, to
Hmm.
start to write the script of our arousal so that we experience it not as an awakening, right? As Song of Songs describes, right?
Yeah.
This awakening to love, an awakening to sex and romance that is meant to happen innocently as your
Hmm.
body enters into puberty. Um, but rather, a joining of that to shame so that you want to hide and bury that part of you. Um, so uh I think evil is trying to not just join your sexuality to shame, but
Hmm.
really to rename your lover heart. As I talk about in my book,
Hmm.
your deepest, I'm convinced your deepest sexual identity is lover. You were created to be a lover. That's your truest sexual identity. That's the story sex was meant to live in.
Yeah.
I think is presented to us in Song of Songs. And
Hmm.
evil wants to give you a different name, like
Mm.
weirdo,
Yeah.
pervert,
Hmm.
um, monster, abuser. That somewhere evil wants to rewrite who you are. So some engagement with what are the stories that brought shame. And again, that could be outright sexual abuse.
Hmm.
1 in 6 men.
Hmm.
Um, but that statistic is almost assuredly low because men are 4 times more likely to be silent than women, and women
Hmm.
already are enormously silent about their abuse. So, I mean, we're talking about like,
Even guys who have been already proved that it has happened are still silent about it, right?
yes, exactly. Yes, to where there's been documented, a social worker has investigated, and
Mm.
only 16% of those men would
Mhm.
acknowledge that it had happened. So, um, yeah, evil wants to bury your sexuality in silence and secrets. Um,
Mhm. Mm.
so my invitation, how do you start to engage that? Um, I'm convinced the only way out of shame is with kindness. You
Mm.
can't incite your way out of shame. You can't think your way out of shame. There really is a need to sit kindly with your own story, and that can be as simple as honoring, being more curious about events in your life than you have been before. A lot of men that
Mhm.
come to me will say, "Yeah, there was some weird things that happened when I was a kid,"
Mhm.
or "Gosh, I plan to never tell anybody about this. I don't know why I'm telling you."
Mm.
Right? So this invitation to, the stories you've held as damning about
Mhm.
you, if you'd be willing to sit more curiously, more kindly with them, um,
Mhm.
I'm, you know, Jesus seemed to save his most tender, kind conversations to the sexually oppressed,
Mm.
sinful, broken.
Mm.
He had such tender conversations with them.
That's true.
And, um, so I'm inviting you. Jesus does not want to rage at you. He doesn't want to accuse you. He wants to sit with you curiously. And
Mhm.
sexuality is just, it is so hard to open up about because it can feel so damning. The
Mhm.
shame that we hold there of, I must be so twisted. I must be so weird, or
Yeah.
I must have invited that. I must be dirty.
Mm.
Um, and so I'm inviting you to turn the tables on that voice. And, that could be as simple as make a list of the top 10 stories that shaped you sexually, right? All of us had some sort of sexual formation, even if we didn't get a sex talk or meaningful sex talk. There were things that shaped you. What are they? Um,
Mhm.
when do you begin to sense evil came to join shame to your arousal, um, and start to rewrite the script? That would be some of the invitation. So kindness and then
Mhm.
curiosity
Mhm.
to your story.
That's amazing. And everyone needs your book because you outline so much more there. And this already, though, gives our audience things they can do now. Because as I
Mm,
know you've mentioned, people will pair unhealthy power with that too. And a lot of the time, men not feeling comfortable
mhm.
or safe want the control and power so that they don't have to approach their shame. And then in the marriage dynamic, it can get really uncomfortable where the husband has to be in charge of everything. And it can, and of course, like we said, this can
Well
go
said.
opposite to different
Uh-huh.
Enneagram types, different struggles. But I think that you're reminding us that if we come in with kindness and curiosity, we might not feel that need as much to be desperate about holding all the power. Is that what you've
Yes.
seen?
Yes, I mean, you are telling the story of my marriage right there. I was the one in my marriage that came in and had to be the one in control of initiating. And when my
Mhm.
wife would move towards me, even for a simple hug in the
Mhm.
kitchen in our
Mhm.
first years of marriage, let alone rolling over in bed, to
Mhm.
cuddle next to me to initiate sexually, I would bristle. I mean, literally lock up like a
Yeah.
board,
Yeah.
and she would, of course, feel rejected and move
Mhm.
away of like, what is tightening up in you?
Yeah.
Um, and this sense of I didn't know what was going on in my body, but I had to
Mhm.
keep control. The free play of sexuality or the free play of desire felt too scary.
Mm.
And I had to be in charge of it, right? And that led me, of course, she uh, wonderfully, and I'm grateful, confronted me to say, "Why are you rejecting me? What
Mm.
is going on?"
Mhm.
Um, and so that landed me in counseling and led me to explore my own story and start to understand, the stories that led me to want control,
Mm.
uh, and not in a healthy way, as you can hear, right? In a way that was mean, in the
Mhm.
end. And was it driven by a hatred for my wife? No, but it was harming to her. So, entering in, taking that risk to be curious about your story, that is not easy work, because it
Mm.
can feel like I am terrified of what I'm going to find inside of
Mhm.
about me.
Yes.
Uh, that really I am twisted and
Mhm.
irrecoverable, right? Like I'm damaged
Mm.
goods or something. Um,
Mhm.
so I think as a man, you're saying it so well. This inability to risk the play of
Mhm.
sex, which requires being out of control at
Mhm.
some level.
Mhm.
Never in a dangerous way, but at some
Mhm.
level, you have to let somebody have power over you,
Mhm.
uh, or
Right.
power with you. Um,
Yes, and desire is intoxicating as we see in Song of Songs. And so something that's been just so helpful for me to learn is that, allowing couples to not only have an awe, like I love that you name that in your book,
mm,
for a male to find the awe and beauty of his wife. And I heard Dan Allender talking about that with you as well.
mm,
I feel like that's so key, especially when paired with sex does not have to just be about orgasm, but about mutual pleasure and love and depth together.
yeah.
Because if he is aroused to the point of overwhelm, he may not be able to, in that moment, even perform sexually. And
Mhm,
once again, we're faced with that old shame that comes back. Oh, you weren't in power. You weren't in control. This isn't
mhm,
what the porn fantasies do.
mhm,
And I think that that's such a loaded quest for men to have to bear. I'm really glad you brought up damaged goods myth for men too. My good friend Dr. Camden talks about that obviously
Mm,
with purity culture and women too, but I'm just happy that we're able to dialogue here that sometimes men face that. They don't know which way to turn and they need
mhm,
permission to go back to that innocence and awe about I'm just overwhelmed with the beauty of my wife, which most of my male
mhm.
clients are and tell me that like they're always like, "Oh my gosh, she's the most beautiful woman in the world."
Yeah,
And that's I'm sure your experience too. So yeah, thank you for shedding light on this.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And awe is that category that requires letting your wife have power over you, right? To be undone.
Yeah.
It's what we want, right? I mean, it is literally what an orgasm is being undone by
Mhm.
the power and presence of another.
Mhm.
And yet, it is hard as men to let someone have power over us. And of course that's true just across all humans. But the idea of being powerless can
Mhm.
sometimes feel like the script of our abuse. I didn't stop it.
Mm.
Or,
Mhm.
I think
Wow.
men in the majority more feel their sexual abuse as I was too weak.
Mhm.
Um, I didn't stop it. Who gets abused, right? And obviously somebody without power. And so that idea of
Mm.
letting power overwhelm us, um, that takes maturity. It
Mhm.
takes having a grounded sense of self. It takes um, being able to receive and welcome love,
Mm.
let alone give it.
Wow, that's well said. And sometimes social support, therapeutic support, as you're saying, this is not done in a vacuum. Sometimes it's you and your partner, as a couple, as married, just, hey, let's figure this out. Sex can be
Yeah.
messy. We remember C.S. Lewis saying that in The Four Loves that it can be difficult. Just expect that. And I try to tell that with my clients beautiful, but difficult as you learn. And so I'm hoping for listeners here with us that they can continue to grow and know that it's not solved overnight, but what would you say men can do if they just want to make sure they're on the track to awe, to innocence, to wonder, to reclaim some of this heritage of healthy empowerment? What would you say is just one thing they can do if they're on that journey?
Yeah. I think regularly, something very basic, right? You have 7 sunrises and sunsets in a week.
Mhm.
Um, pick one and let yourself really take it in. The idea of experiencing the overpowering pleasure, sensuality of beauty on the
Mm,
regular, just being open to that, actually grows your capacity to take in more awe. Awe is unique in that it's non-hedonic. The more you do it, the more your capacity grows. It doesn't blunt you as, things like alcohol or other addictive things can do, right? Where you need more and more and more to get the same pleasure. Awe is the reverse. So, an invitation to let yourself be undone more
mm,
by lines of a poem, a song in your truck as you're driving, a movie scene. Like, let those tears come when you feel them. Let yourself be undone um, by a sunset, or and even more, um start a good conversation with your wife.
mhm,
Try to notice and catch moments when you experience awe for her and name it. Talk about it out loud. Let yourself communicate more from that place rather than harbor. I think men experience these things and sometimes they don't talk about it.
mm,
And because that can feel very vulnerable to
mm,
be moved by another. Um, so I think practicing daily awe, again, it could be a wildflower, it could be a line of poem,
mhm,
music, but somewhere where you're letting yourself be undone. Um, and then learning to receive love, um, meaning you let someone pursue you, actually say something more than I'm fine when
mm.
somebody says, "How are you?" Learn to welcome and receive care and love, um, would be another just small basic thing.
Mhm. But terrifying. for a
Yeah.
very masculine person. So
Yes.
I love that you're naming that. And that might even be something some of our women out there are like, oh, that's hard for me to be vulnerable. But or if we were doing Myers-Briggs, anyone with that IJ. But I just love that you're naming that if you can make sure to practice this in small bits, like even if it's just one
Mhm.
day a week or just a little bit, because
Mhm.
we know that that's powerful to just see, did you feel safe? Were you able to regulate? Were you able to self-soothe in ways
Mhm.
that weren't about lust management, but just allowed yourself to be attracted? I've loved your analogy about just the beauty of seeing Caitlin Clark play on the basketball court. My
Yes.
daughter, who's a 9, has a lot of like, she's been on our pod a lot, but she has a lot of like wisdom of like, you would think she's a lot older. And one of the things she challenged my husband with as a teenager, um, which I feel like my self-pres 4 in her way, she goes sometimes to her 1 still, and she's learning to go all the way to the 2, and, sometimes she's just like, "Whatever dad says goes," and, like, my 9 wing 8, she's much more another body type like my husband who's a
Mm.
1, so she
Mhm.
challenges him so much, and, my husband and son, we were all watching something like an Adam Sandler movie, say, and it was like we found one that was, like, decent, and, we were watching, and then, my husband says, "Okay, Jack, look down," that typical phrase of like, there's a really attractive woman on stage, look down, because this is we were raised in purity culture and it's kind of
Uh-huh.
weird. And my daughter she just did one of those tongue clucks, like, come on, dad, like, you've got to be able to handle this. I find it more
Yes.
dishonoring that you can't handle this. And it was such a good conversation that he's like, I can, but I felt like I wasn't honoring you. And it just led us to this great conversation as a
Yeah.
family where she didn't have the articulate words and adult language we're using, but she was basically saying, we're allowed awe. You're allowed to do that. And she was healing her dad's purity culture upbringing by just
Yeah.
inviting him into not worrying about seeing an attractive woman on TV.
That's so powerful. That is
Yes.
so wise.
Yes.
I
I was
love
so
that she
happy.
trusted her instinct.
Yes. And so they've been he has to unlearn some things. So there may be
Mhm.
some people out there that are like, let's figure this out together as a couple. Like, how do we honor that there's beauty in the world outside of this marriage? Come on.
Mhm. Right. Right. Yes. And that can be tense, right? That can create, if there isn't safety and security in your
Yeah,
marriage,
right.
right? That can feel um uh tense, for lack
Mhm,
of better words. And I would say, the difference is I can have awe, for, let's say, a woman at the grocery store or in line at Starbucks. I can say, wow, what a beautiful woman. But,
mhm.
that's about as much as I'm going to be able to
Fixate on.
know
Right,
her, right?
right.
I
Mhm,
is this moment for 5 minutes that she's standing in line in Starbucks. But
right.
I can know my wife with
Mhm,
with depth, right? And we're not just talking about surface level beauty. We're
mm-mm,
talking about all that makes a person extravagant, all the glory of God in them. So
mhm,
if you're not exploring that,
mhm,
if it's just staying surface level, that can create tension if you're not
mhm,
exploring the mystery
mhm.
of your spouse.
That's right. You bring up such a good point, too, that in our culture, people have often left the thread of even the dyadic marriage and they're making places less safe for each other, even though they may
Mhm.
even have sort of an innocence of, would this work? I'm curious. It's not a healthy bond when you invite in long, long gazes and long, long relationship depths with other people who are attractive to you.
Mhm.
And I think that that's so helpful for you to just even invite people into other ways of experiencing awe and desire versus just in the sexual realm. You're really
Mhm.
reminding this is a creative desire you have to see beauty in the world. So let
Yeah.
it be that you dwell on a sad movie or a sunset. Thank you for just giving us some very tangible tips.
Yes.
Wow, that's so good. Okay.
Yeah, I love what you're saying there about marriage, as, if you are developing other places outside of that connection for awe with another person, again, that everyone has the glory of God. So that can be a beautiful, just knowing of other people, even if that's just friendship. But obviously, if you're not exploring, again, as you said, well, the depths of your spouse, um, that um, that is such a setup for jealousy and tension. Something's being avoided there.
Hmm.
And that needs to, the question of, why are you not letting yourself be undone? because everyone has glory. So if there's what's in the way of you exploring the depths of your spouse's heart, um, play, what they love, their passions, that would be a good question to ask as well. Um,
Really good. Thank you. That's amazing. Thank you so much. I really love that you are just helping us to develop our marriages on a deeper level. I can't tell you how meaningful that is, even just inspiring me right in this moment, just to make sure I'm pursuing the projects and pieces of my own husband's heart that I need to.
mm,
And now that we're kind of doing some of this work, Wes and I, and here on the podcast, what would you say we might share with those in our society, friends, kids? Just, I don't know if there's been ways you've been able to just gently shape community too with what you're learning. Cause I do get the sense that this is a small group of us trying to bring this out
yeah.
sort of a wave.
Yeah. There are so many ways, even just as simple as if you're a person who practices awe for people, it will be far harder to go along with, let's say a crass sex. I'm remembering being on the soccer field. This was a year ago, and a dad just catching up. One of the other soccer dads on the team of our boys, and he cracked a sex joke about his wife that was really degrading. Right in the middle of
Mm.
they're warming up, and his wife was 2 feet away.
Yeah.
And there was a sense of like it just gave me a different perspective of like I can't just laugh along with you, dude.
Yeah.
I'm too into this book, and
Yeah.
um writing the book wrecked me in its own way. So
Yeah.
it was good to be able to let this man just flounder in a moment of his own silence
Yeah.
of I
Mhm.
didn't laugh along,
Yeah.
and it got very awkward, and he changed the subject. And I pray that that moment would allow this man to think differently of like you just cracked a sex joke about your wife that
Yeah.
degraded her. So something as simple as that, right, is if you
Mhm.
practice awe and you make awe the basis of your sexuality, you'll be able you will naturally engage moments differently like that. Um, but as well as you'll be able to enjoy and celebrate other people's glory when it's their
Mhm.
moment on the stage, right? Whether that's your child's, soccer goal
Mhm.
or play or, a moment where you catch your wife dancing and
Mm.
or you see her fighting for your child in a certain way, you'll be able to just give feedback to people that will be encouraging and affirming,
Mhm.
different than sexualizing and objectifying.
Mm.
So you won't be able to stomach um, the way culture does that. You'll just know it so cheapens,
Mm.
what really is glorious. Um,
Mhm.
but I think along with that, you know, just having an ear, when you've done this work, you'll start to have an ear for people's shame
Mhm.
or, hints of people's story,
Yeah.
or you'll be able to ask questions around, um, when people bring up, like a guy brings up his struggle with pornography addiction, you'll be able to sift differently than just sin management. You'll be able to
Mm.
ask questions about that or be curious about that. So I think, um, as simple as that, but as big as, I have clients who travel and do undercover work in Thailand,
Mm.
um
Mm.
to fight sex trafficking there. I mean, it could be as obviously that is,
Mm.
to the heart of the evil assault against sexual harm in our culture. But um I think as well just being more aware of sexual abuse. I obviously there is a cultural story of sex that the church is trying to address, but I don't think the church addresses often the category of sexual abuse. And,
Mhm.
you need to sit with, if you're a Christian leader or a pastor, the awareness that 1 in 3 women,
Mm.
which is probably low,
Mhm.
right? A CDC report would say 1 in 2 women over their lifetime will experience some sort of sexual harm, whether that's childhood sexual abuse or partner abuse.
Mhm.
1 in 2. So you have 50%
Mhm.
of your audience on a Sunday of women.
Mhm.
1 in 3 men, says the CDC, will experience, whether that's childhood sexual abuse or partner abuse, some form of sexual harm. So you have a huge audience of people who have pain and shame in their story. So learning to speak not just about sex in terms of sin or not sin,
Mhm.
right? But wounding and shame and evil's attack, beginning to
Mm.
have a more complex conversation, whether that's with a friend over coffee or if you're a pastor preaching, how are you addressing sexual abuse? How are you addressing the stories of sexual abuse in the Bible?
Yeah.
How are you preaching on Esther, right?
Mhm.
As a sex
Mhm.
trafficked woman
Yeah.
and the and male entitlement and abuse in the beginning story, right? Like it is there ripe for the picking as an example that you could preach from for how we hold sexual harm, and how God enters our story with us there. Um, so those would be a few things that come to mind.
Thank you. That is so helpful. And you have such a gift, such brilliance around this topic. You can tell you put your heart and soul and mind into this book. And your body sacrificially. So
Mm,
thank you. And
mhm,
and just even into our interview today, I know lives are going to be changed from this interview.
mm.
And I want to invite people on more journeys with you, Sam. Thank you again. Can you tell everybody how they can reach you for your book and for your Substack and etc.?
Yeah, Krista, thank you as well. There is such a rich conversation you're having. There's such a deep echo back. And I love that you are inviting this conversation for your audience. It is clear you care very much for them. Um, so thank you. Uh, you can reach me. My book is available wherever you buy your books. And right now, currently, my publisher is still offering a buy one, get one free, an ongoing option. So if you want to buy a book and you could buy the audio book and read along in the paperback or give one to a friend, you can go to my website, samjolman.com. And also I'm on Substack and continuing to write there. And I do Zoom conversations. My Substacks are free and would love to have you read there and meet you there. And I'm on Instagram as well. It's probably the place I'm most active these days.
Wonderful. Thank you for those beautiful options. And I know people are excited to get the buy one, get one's one more way they can share with others. Thank you so much, Sam. We loved having you today.
Thank you, Krista. This has been great.
Thank you so much for joining us for this special episode. I hope you are running to grab this book and please make it one that you actually read thoroughly. And if you need certain chapters more than others, of course, make sure you take a deep dive there. But there's just so much goodness wrapped into different pieces that I found that I was like, oh, I'm really glad I took my way through this on Audible so I could hear every sentence. So I hope you get that. It's just comforting to know we're not alone out there in the various issues we've processed and continue to do your work. You'll see what gorgeous fruits you can recover and come back to your love with beauty and awe and wonder and lots of care for each other. So, all right, I'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.